Before Yahweh was known as the one God of the Bible, before he was called the Father in heaven, before he was described as eternal, omniscient, and the only God who ever existed, he was a name spoken among other names, a force among other forces, a storm among storms. The ancient world did not begin with theology. It began with survival. The land did not ask what was true. It demanded what worked: rain, fertility, protection, continuity. And the gods who mattered were not the most moral or the most abstract, but the ones whose presence could be felt in the sky, in the soil, and in the bones of those who depended on them. To understand this world, you have to understand the people who lived in it. The Canaanites were the ancient inhabitants of the Levant, the lands we now call Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and parts of Syria. They were not philosophers. They were farmers, herders, and survivors. Their religion was not about belief in the modern sense. It was about keeping the world alive. Their gods were not distant beings in another realm. They were woven directly into nature itself. Storms were gods. Drought was a god. Death was a god. Life itself was divine. At the summit of this divine world stood El, the ancient high god of the Canaanites. El was the creator, the patriarch, the father of gods and humans alike. He was described as enthroned, wise, and immovable. El represented authority without urgency, order without intervention. He ruled the cosmos, but he did not descend into the fields when crops failed. Action belonged to younger, more violent powers. Among them stood Baal, the god of storms, thunder, lightning, and rain. Baal was not symbolic. He was practical. He was the god who made crops grow. His most ancient title was Rider on the Clouds, because when storms gathered, it was Baal who was believed to be moving across the sky. When Baal spoke, thunder rolled. When Baal fought, lightning struck. When Baal was present, rain fell, and life continued. Baal was not worshipped because he was kind. He was worshipped because he was necessary. In the ancient stories preserved at Ugarit, Baal battles the forces of chaos and defeats them, establishing order so the world can function. He opens the windows of the heavens and pours rain upon the land. But Baal is not eternal. He is vulnerable. He can be defeated, and the one who defeats him is Mot. Mot was not a devil. He was not evil in the moral sense. Mot was death itself, not as punishment, but as inevitability. He was drought, sterility, the dry season, the moment when life withdraws from the land. When Mot takes Baal in the myths, rain ceases, fields die, animals starve, human life collapses into desperation. And yet Mot does not rule forever. Baal returns. Rain comes back. The land breathes again. This was not resurrection theology. This was seasonal reality. Life was cyclical. Death was not final. It was part of the rhythm of existence. Alongside El, Baal, and Mot stood Asherah, the great mother goddess of the Canaanite world. Asherah was fertility, nourishment, sexuality, and abundance. She was the source of life itself, the womb of gods and humans alike. Sacred trees marked her presence. Wooden poles stood near altars as symbols of living fertility. She was paired with El as his consort, and later in early Israelite religion, she was even associated with Yahweh himself. Archaeological inscriptions discovered centuries later still whisper of Yahweh and his Asherah, not as heresy, but as memory. Together, these figures formed a living ecosystem, not a hierarchy of good and evil, not a clean pantheon, but a negotiation between growth and decay, chaos and survival. And this is the world Yahweh enters. For many people today, even many Christians, God is assumed to be a single eternal being who has always existed exactly as he is now. But in the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh has a history. Yahweh is the God who later becomes known as the God of Israel, and eventually, in Christian theology, as God the Father. But early on, Yahweh is not presented as the only God who exists. He is a warrior, a storm-associated deity, a God of fire, thunder, mountains, and battle. Yahweh does not enter this world denying other gods. In fact, the Hebrew scriptures preserve the assumption that other gods exist. In the Song of Moses it is written, "Who is like you among the gods, O Lord?" The question only makes sense in a world where many gods are assumed. Yahweh's demand is not philosophical truth, it is allegiance. You shall have no other gods before me, not because they are unreal, but because they are rivals. Two storm gods cannot share the sky. And so begins a war that is not fought with swords, but with language. A war preserved in hymns, psalms, and poetry. Baal's most ancient title, Rider on the Clouds, is quietly taken by Yahweh in the Psalms. Sing to God, extol him who rides on the clouds. The title is not explained, it is not defended, it is simply claimed. Titles are not borrowed accidentally, they are trophies. In Baal's myths, thunder is his voice. The sky shakes when he speaks. And then Psalm 29 appears, declaring, "The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness." The structure and cadence mirror older Baal hymns almost exactly. This is not coincidence. This is conquest through poetry. Baal defeats the chaotic sea in his myths, establishing order over the waters. Yahweh divides the sea in Exodus, commands the deep, and later crushes Leviathan, the twisting serpent of chaos. "You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the sea monsters," declares Psalm 74. Same enemy, same pattern, new victor. Israel does not abandon myth, it rebrands it. Rain, the final loyalty of farmers and families, is transferred next. Where Baal once opened the heavens, Yahweh now declares in Deuteronomy, "I will give the rain for your land in its season." A God who cannot bring rain cannot survive an agricultural world. Theology follows survival, not the other way around. Once Yahweh absorbs Baal's power, Baal must become something else. He cannot remain a god. He becomes a warning. Fertility becomes corruption. Cycles become meaninglessness. Nature becomes chaos. What once sustained life is reframed as sin. You do not demonize imaginary enemies. You demonize rivals. And when a god loses, history remembers him as evil. But Yahweh does not stop with Baal. He absorbs El's authority, becoming not just a warrior, but the Most High, the creator of heaven and earth. The divine council remains. God stands in the assembly of the gods. He judges among the gods, but its members are demoted. Gods become angels. Power is centralized. And Asherah, the mother of life, is not argued against. She is not disproven. She is erased. Because monotheism does not simplify divinity. It concentrates it. Then Yahweh loses everything. Jerusalem falls, the temple is destroyed, the land is taken, the people are exiled, and instead of dying like other gods, Yahweh transforms. He leaves the storm, leaves the mountain, leaves the land itself. He becomes text, law, covenant, history. "I kill and I make alive," declares Deuteronomy. Yahweh does not die and return like Baal. He stands outside the cycle. Time becomes linear. History moves toward judgment. Death becomes moral. When a god loses territory, he moves into the mind. The storm never disappears. It relocates. And then something unprecedented happens. In early Christian thought, the authority of Yahweh does not disappear. It moves again. This time, not into law or text alone, but into a person. Jesus is presented not as a new God competing with Yahweh, but as the embodiment of Yahweh's authority itself. Where Yahweh once judged the nations and ruled history, Jesus becomes the cosmic judge and king. Dominion over heaven and earth is placed into his hands. Titles once reserved for Yahweh alone are now spoken over Jesus. Lord, King of kings, Judge of all. The New Testament declares that every knee will bow. Language lifted directly from earlier proclamations about Yahweh. What once belonged to thunder, law, and fire is now refracted through a human life. Yahweh's power does not vanish. It is reinterpreted, universalized, moralized, internalized. This is not the abandonment of Yahweh. It is his transformation. Baal ruled the seasons. Yahweh ruled history. Jesus rules meaning itself. The storm that once shook mountains now moves through conscience, identity, salvation, and judgment. The final temple is not built from stone. It is built inside the human psyche. And even now, long after belief has shifted, the gods remain. Baal survives in instinct, desire, nature, and the eternal return. Yahweh survives in systems, laws, ideologies, and absolute claims on truth. Jesus survives as the face through which authority becomes personal and universal. This was not the end of myth. It was the upgrade. And if this story unsettled you, if it made something ancient feel disturbingly present, then you already understand what this channel exists to do. Unmasking the gods is not about destroying belief. It is about revealing the forces that still shape us, long after we've forgotten their names. Subscribe to Unmasking the Gods, because the gods never left. They just learned how to hide.